The palace was meant to be a place of unity, but on this night, silence carried more weight than words. Whispers traveled through corridors, servants froze mid-step, and all eyes turned toward one chilling revelation. A plan so ruthless, so unthinkable, it shattered the very heart of the monarchy. And at the center of it all stood Camilla, her scheme hidden in plain sight, designed not just to wound Catherine, but to erase her completely. It began as a normal evening, the kind where the golden glow of chandeliers disguised the fractures beneath the surface. Yet beneath that quiet elegance lay a secret that struck like lightning when revealed. For Prince William, the heir who had weathered storms since childhood, this was the blow that stripped away his composure. He was not just a son, not just a prince, but a husband watching the woman he loved, targeted by the very institution meant to protect her. The discovery ripped through him with the weight of betrayal, and his emotional collapse could not be hidden from those closest to the throne. Camilla's fingerprints were everywhere, though not in the obvious sense. She was the architect behind the whispers, the one who had turned suspicion into strategy. Her brilliance was her subtlety. Nothing carried her name, yet every thread led back to her. The scheme was calculated, cruel, and cloaked in the language of tradition. For William, it felt like history repeating itself. The same cruel forces that once crushed his mother were now reaching for his wife. He had believed those days were gone, buried with the painful lessons of the past. He was wrong. Catherine's position, once thought untouchable, now trembled like glass on the verge of shattering. For years she had stood as the face of stability, her grace shielding the monarchy from criticism. But the plan threatened to strip her of all her titles, her dignity, her rightful place beside the future king. It was not a scandal whispered in gossip magazines. It was a plot engineered within the palace walls, where power was currency and betrayal was an art form. Catherine herself, though calm in appearance, was shaken to the core. Her silence was not surrender but the heavy pause of a queen in waiting, forced to fight an unseen enemy. The air inside the palace grew thicker by the hour. Every glance carried suspicion. Every sound echoed louder than it should have. Servants avoided meeting one another's eyes, knowing they were walking inside a house fractured from within. Dread clung to the walls like a shadow, pressing on all who lived there. Rumors of a secret meeting, one that had set Camilla's plan in motion, spread quickly. Few knew the details, but everyone sensed the danger. Something irreversible had been set loose, and the monarchy itself trembled under its weight. For William, the weight of betrayal became unbearable. His heart, already scarred by loss, could not withstand the vision of Catherine being pushed aside. His despair gave way to fury, his composure cracking as he realized that this was no misunderstanding, no trivial power struggle. It was deliberate, and it was personal. But the story of how Camilla's plan came to life began long before this night, rooted in rivalries and ambitions that no one dared to speak aloud until now. For years, Catherine carried the weight of a future crown with quiet dignity. She became the people's choice, their queen in waiting, the symbol of hope in a fractured monarchy. Yet behind her smile, Camilla saw something more dangerous than charm. She saw competition. And in that perception lay the seeds of betrayal, jealousy, and a battle that would shake the throne itself. Catherine's story within the royal family had begun as an outsider, stepping into a world shaped by centuries of tradition. Many doubted her at first, seeing her as a commoner navigating a life designed for blue bloods. But with unwavering patience and a quiet strength, she transformed into a cornerstone of the monarchy. Every public appearance, every carefully chosen word, strengthened her image not as an accessory to William, but as a figure destined to be queen. To the public, Catherine embodied stability, grace, and an unshakable calm in an era when scandals had left the monarchy fragile. She did not demand adoration, she earned it. Her rising influence created a contrast that could not be ignored. Crowds cheered her name, newspapers praised her elegance, and her every act of compassion resonated deeply with the people. She became the face of a modern monarchy that balanced tradition with progress. Yet for Camilla, this devotion was not a blessing. It was a threat. The louder the applause for Catherine grew, the more deafening the silence felt for her own role. Where Catherine was admired as a symbol of the future, Camilla remained tied to a past that many still refused to forget. That disparity stoked a fire of resentment that smoldered quietly behind her polished smile. Though appearances suggested harmony, subtle rivalries played out in ways the public never saw. A lingering glance, a clipped remark, a shift of influence in family matters. These small gestures carried the weight of unspoken battles. Camilla's skepticism of Catherine's popularity was not expressed openly, but it lived in the careful ways she sought to remind others of her authority as queen consort. Yet Catherine, never confrontational, responded not with words, but with actions that drew the people closer to her. Every charitable initiative, every demonstration of loyalty to William and the crown reinforced her standing as the monarchy's heart. As Catherine's influence expanded, Camilla began to feel her own legacy shrinking. The thought of being overshadowed, of being remembered as a footnote to the future reign of William and Catherine, was intolerable. And so, what began as insecurity grew into quiet determination. Camilla, who had weathered storms of public disdain before, was not willing to fade quietly into history. Behind the scenes, her resentment hardened into strategy, her jealousy into resolve. The polished civility between the two women masked the reality that one's rise meant the other's inevitable decline. For Catherine, grace was her shield, but in the ruthless theater of monarchy, grace alone would not be enough. Forces were gathering, whispers taking form, and shadows beginning to move. Catherine's crown, still silent and unworn, was already under siege before it had even been placed upon her head. But while Catherine stood admired, Camilla was already assembling her own quiet army, and its first weapon was secrecy. It began with whispers in parliament corridors, in charity boardrooms, even at dinners, disguised as family gatherings. Camilla knew she could not confront Catherine publicly. Her strength lay in the shadows, weaving a web of influence, promising allies rewards in exchange for loyalty. The plan was as audacious as it was cruel. Remove Catherine from the line of queenship before the nation could crown her. Those whispers did not fade. They multiplied. Aristocrats who once stood neutral found themselves courted by Camilla, who offered them assurances of power, influence, and protection should they align with her. She spoke not in commands, but in carefully measured suggestions, planting doubts about Catherine's suitability as queen. Was she too modern? Too independent? Too beloved by the people to remain controllable within the rigid confines of monarchy? Camilla played upon these fears, ensuring that those who already harbored suspicions of Catherine now saw their doubts magnified. At the heart of her strategy was a growing circle of advisors who swore loyalty not to the crown itself, but to Camilla personally. They operated like a secret society, bound by discretion and motivated by the promise of positions in a reshaped monarchy. In closed-door meetings, they devised scenarios, rehearsed narratives, and plotted the downfall of the woman they saw as a dangerous symbol of change. The public saw unity, but in truth, two monarchies were forming, one visible and one hidden, forged in shadows. Camilla knew that to dismantle Catherine's rising influence, she needed to weaponize her vulnerabilities. Every perceived flaw became a tool. Whispers about her background, doubts about her ability to bear the relentless pressures of queenship, even private insecurities were quietly circulated among those willing to listen. The whispers gained momentum, not because they were true, but because they served the ambitions of those who feared a monarchy led by Catherine might eclipse their own power. Charles's fragile health only emboldened Camilla. Time, she believed, was her greatest ally. His moments of visible weakness were carefully framed as justification for her urgency. If Catherine was allowed to cement her place while Charles grew frail, Camilla's influence would be permanently diminished, so she accelerated the timeline, pressing her allies to act swiftly, to corner Catherine before her crown became inevitable. Among Camilla's confidants were powerful figures who saw themselves as guardians of tradition. To them, Catherine represented a monarchy, bending too far to public opinion, too willing to modernize, too prepared to place empathy above power. They believed Camilla's vision, though ruthless, preserved the old ways. And so they pledged their silence, their loyalty, and their signatures to a cause they thought necessary for survival. But secrecy is fragile, and conspiracies, no matter how carefully hidden, leave traces. Camilla's greatest weapon, silence, would become her undoing. For within her web of alliances lay a single document, sealed and disguised as protocol, that carried the essence of her plan. If discovered, it would strip away the shadows and reveal the betrayal in black and white. The conspiracy might have remained buried, but a single paper, left in the wrong hands, would change everything. It was just a folded sheet of parchment, but within its words lay a dagger aimed straight at Catherine's crown. Found by accident, delivered by fate, this single document revealed the scale of Camilla's ambition. For William, reading it was like reliving his mother's battles all over again. Betrayal, manipulation, and a cruel attempt to erase the woman he loved. The paper was not ornate, not gilded with any seals of power, yet its authority was unmistakable. It bore the language of tradition, written with precision so careful it seemed official, though no sovereign had signed it. Every line dripped with formality, as though the authors hoped it would pass as unquestionable truth. And within those lines, Catherine's identity as future queen was dismantled, replaced by cold phrases that suggested her presence was unsuitable, her role unnecessary, her crown undeserved. It was a draft protocol designed not to preserve the monarchy, but to fracture it from within. For William, the shock of those words was unbearable. He read and reread the sentences, unable to comprehend how anyone could frame such betrayal in the language of duty. This was no harmless draft. This was a weapon. It sought to cut Catherine out of history before she could fully enter it. And the cruel familiarity of the betrayal carved deep into William's heart, echoing memories of Diana, the woman who had been undermined, discarded, and silenced by the very forces sworn to protect her. In those moments, William did not see mere words on a page. He saw his mother's struggles resurrected, a ghost of the same torment Catherine was now forced to endure. When he placed the paper in Catherine's hands, her reaction was not anger, but stunned silence. She stared at the words, her composure unbroken, yet her eyes betrayed the sting of humiliation. To be so carefully erased, not in public scandal but in coldly drafted lines of ink, was a cruelty beyond measure. Her silence carried weight. It was not weakness, but the unspoken acknowledgement that she understood what had been set in motion. This was not just an attempt to diminish her title. It was a declaration of war against her very place beside William. The document was never meant to be seen by them. It was designed for shadows, for whispers, for hands that would use it when the moment was right. But fate had placed it in William's grasp, and with that discovery, the game had changed. No longer whispers, no longer speculation. This was proof, tangible and undeniable, of Camilla's determination to dethrone the woman destined to be queen. William's devastation turned quickly to resolve. The weight of betrayal became fuel for the storm building inside him. He could not allow Catherine to suffer the same fate his mother had. Not again. Not while he still drew breath. His grief was transforming into fury, and the pages of betrayal were becoming the spark for confrontation. If the document was the weapon, the confrontation would be the battlefield, and William would not stand idly by. For years, William mastered control of the calm air, the steady hand, the composed prince. But in the face of Camilla's plan, restraint shattered. His voice cracked, his hands trembled, and for the first time, the world saw the heir to the throne not as a prince, but as a son, a husband, and a man who had finally been broken. The moment he confronted Camilla was not rehearsed, not measured, and certainly not political. It was raw, explosive, and entirely human. The carefully maintained image of dignity collapsed under the weight of betrayal, and William's fury erupted like a storm that could no longer be contained. He demanded answers, his words sharp and unrelenting, piercing through the silence of the room where the confrontation unfolded. Camilla, who had built her power on whispers and subtle control, now found herself face to face with the wrath of a man pushed beyond his breaking point. The exchange behind those closed doors was not one of formality, but of desperation. William's accusations were not gentle inquiries but thunderous indictments. He spoke of betrayal, of loyalty shattered, of the cruelty of conspiring against Catherine, the woman who had stood beside him through every trial. Camilla, long accustomed to shaping narratives from the shadows, was unprepared for the force of William's rage. The clash was not only about Catherine's crown but about the very soul of the monarchy, ripped open in a storm of anguish and defiance. William, usually measured, could no longer conceal the pain that consumed him. His anger burned through his restraint, his voice rising in ways the palace walls had never heard before. His composure, once his greatest strength, lay in pieces at his feet. He no longer spoke as a diplomat, nor as the future king. He spoke as a son haunted by the memory of his mother's torment and as a husband unwilling to watch history repeat itself. Every word was a vow that he would not allow Catherine to be destroyed in the same way Diana had been. Through it all, Catherine remained present, her silence speaking volumes. She did not plead or intervene, but her eyes carried both sorrow and strength. Her calm presence was the anchor in the chaos, reminding William that even in his darkest rage, she stood by him. She bore the weight of betrayal with quiet resilience, a contrast that made William's fury all the more consuming. It was her silence that gave his anger purpose, her composure that made his breakdown both devastating and noble. Servants stationed nearby caught fragments of the storm, muffled shouts, sharp exchanges, and the unmistakable sound of a prince's fury reverberated through the corridors. Whispers spread quickly, carried by trembling voices that spoke of a royal meltdown unlike any seen before. The walls of the palace, built to contain secrets, now trembled with the weight of what they could not hold back. The private confrontation was meant to remain hidden, sealed behind locked doors and closed lips. Yet moments such as these, once unleashed, cannot be buried forever. The cracks were widening, the truth pressing against the surface, and soon the world would learn what had transpired. But what was meant to remain private would soon spill into the public eye, and once unleashed, the monarchy would never look the same. When the truth escaped the palace walls, it struck like lightning. Headlines screamed betrayal, citizens gasped in disbelief, and commentators spoke of a monarchy in collapse. Catherine's supporters rose in outrage, while Camilla's defenders spun narratives of loyalty. What had been whispered in corridors was now shouted in public squares, and the world demanded answers. The leak of Camilla's plot was not gradual. It was explosive. A single headline in a national paper ignited the storm, its words dripping with scandal. The Queen Consort's secret plan to strip Catherine of her rightful place. What had once been speculation now stood exposed in print. Undeniable, irrefutable. The world could not look away. What had been whispered in secret boardrooms now became dinner-table discussions in every household across the nation and beyond. Public outrage was immediate and ferocious. Crowds that once filled the streets for celebrations now gathered with banners of anger and voices of protest. Catherine's image, long cherished as a symbol of grace and duty, became the rallying point for a nation that felt deceived. She was no longer simply a princess in waiting. She was the people's queen, their chosen figure, the one they believed had been wronged by a plot as cruel as it was calculated. Sympathy for her swelled into devotion, and devotion into fury directed at those who sought to dethrone her. But not everyone turned against Camilla. Her defenders, loyalists who believed she had earned her place by survival and sacrifice, doubled down on her narrative. They painted Catherine as too modern, too independent, too much of a risk for the stability of the throne. These voices clashed loudly with Catherine's supporters, creating a divide not just within the monarchy, but across the very fabric of the nation. The royal family was no longer a symbol of unity. It had become a battlefield of allegiance. Amidst the uproar stood Charles, caught in a storm he could no longer control. Once silent whispers now demanded his voice, his judgment, his decision. Every advisor urged caution, every ally demanded loyalty, every family member whispered in his ear. Yet, the louder they spoke, the quieter Charles became. His silence deepened the crisis. interpreted by many as complicity, by others as indecision. In truth, it was the paralysis of a man torn between love, loyalty, and the duty that chained him to the throne. The world watched as the monarchy's image teetered on the brink. International media cast the crisis as a modern tragedy, a spectacle of betrayal at the heart of one of the world's most enduring dynasties. Nations once respectful of British stability began to question whether the crown itself had any moral ground left to stand on. What was meant to be a family matter had transformed into a global scandal, and every passing hour without resolution deepened the fracture. And yet, beneath all the noise and outrage, one truth remained unavoidable. Only one man could decide the future of the crown. The protests, the headlines, the accusations, the tears all came down to a choice that Charles alone would have to make. But as the nation raged, the decision lay in one pair of hands, and Charles's silence spoke louder than words. He was king, yet he was also a husband and a father. Charles stood at the intersection of loyalty and duty, torn between the woman he married and the son who embodied his legacy. In those tense hours, the monarchy's fate balanced on a knife's edge, and Charles knew whichever path he chose would fracture his family forever. Behind the palace doors, Charles wrestled with a torment that few could fathom. Camilla's scheme had shaken the crown at its very core, yet to confront her publicly meant exposing the monarchy's fractures to the world. To protect her, however, would mean standing against William, the son who carried the memory of Diana and the future of the throne in his every step. For Charles, the question was not simply about protocol or politics, it was about the unbearable choice between love and legacy. His advisors swarmed him with demands for decisive action. Some urged him to protect Camilla, reminding him of the years she had stood by his side, the battles she had endured, the image she had helped restore. Others whispered of Catherine's irreplaceable role in the hearts of the people, warning that to cast her aside would ignite outrage that no crown could withstand. Their voices were urgent, their tones sharp, each pulling him in opposite directions until the weight of their counsel became unbearable. The fear of public rebellion loomed large. Reports flooded in of citizens outraged by the plot, crowds gathering in support of Catherine, commentators questioning the monarchy's moral compass. The people had chosen their queen in spirit, and to defy that choice was to invite fury. Charles, ever conscious of his reign's fragile acceptance, knew that ignoring Catherine's plight could unravel the monarchy before it ever reached William's hands. The image of protests outside the palace, the roar of betrayal in the streets, haunted his every decision. Yet the most piercing tension came from within his own family. William confronted him directly, his voice heavy with grief and anger. He demanded that his father protect Catherine, not as a future queen, but as his wife and partner, the woman who had stood with him against relentless scrutiny. For William, silence from his father was not neutrality, it was betrayal. And Charles, seeing the torment in his son's eyes, was reminded of Diana, the woman he had lost, the ghost that still lingered over every decision he made. The parallels were unbearable, each memory striking him like a wound reopened. The echoes of past scandals weighed heavily on him. The monarchy had weathered storms of betrayal, divorce, and tragedy. Yet this felt different. This was not the chaos of tabloids or the mistakes of youth. This was a deliberate scheme that threatened to redefine the crown itself. Charles could feel history repeating, the sins of the past casting their long shadow upon the present. His reign, once meant to stabilize, was now caught in the same cycle of turmoil he had sworn to end. And so, in the deadlock of loyalty, duty, and fear, Charles saw only one path forward. It would not heal the wounds. It would not erase the betrayals. But it would, at least for a moment, secure the crown from complete collapse. With the stroke of a pen, he prepared to decide not only the fate of Catherine and Camilla, but the destiny of the monarchy itself. And then, with the stroke of a pen, Charles changed the monarchy's future, but not in the way anyone expected. The hall fell silent as Charles's voice echoed, a decree that would silence whispers, restore order, and deliver a blow that even Camilla had not foreseen. With trembling hands, the king signed Catherine's place into permanence not just as a consort, but as the people's destined queen. It was both a victory and a wound, for in cementing Catherine's crown, Charles had shattered his marriage. The words of the decree resounded with the weight of finality. Before gathered witnesses, Charles declared Catherine's role unassailable, her future beside William sealed beyond dispute. The speculation that had plagued the monarchy, the whispers that had nearly toppled it, were cut down in a single stroke. This was no vague assurance, no hollow gesture of support. It was binding, public, and irrevocable. Catherine was not merely tolerated within the institution, she was confirmed as its future. For William, the moment brought a wave of emotional relief that nearly broke him. After months of torment, of watching his wife targeted in the shadows, the decree felt like a shield drawn at last. The pain of betrayal was not erased, but in that instant, Catherine's dignity was restored, her crown untouchable. He saw his father not only as a king, but as a man who had finally chosen his son's future over his own comfort. Catherine, though outwardly composed, felt the crushing weight of uncertainty lift from her shoulders. She had endured the quiet storm with silence and grace, and now the people's faith in her was no longer a question of sentiment, but a matter of law. But as relief washed over William and Catherine, devastation fell upon Camilla. To see her plan collapse so completely, to watch her husband enshrine the very woman she had tried to erase, was a blow she could not conceal. She stood in silence, her position secure in name but shattered in reality. For years, she had clawed her way into legitimacy, endured scandal and hostility, only to find her influence severed with one decree. Her allies in whispers were suddenly powerless, their carefully woven conspiracy undone by the ink of Charles's pen. The monarchy, for a moment, seemed stabilized. Public outrage eased, commentators shifted their tone, and the people rallied around Catherine as their confirmed future queen. What had felt like the brink of collapse now appeared as a turning point, a rebirth, a chance for the crown to emerge stronger. Yet beneath the appearance of unity lay fractures no decree could heal. Charles and Camilla's union was torn, the bond of trust irreparably broken. What he had signed for the sake of the monarchy, he had also signed against his marriage. It was a decision that restored order to the crown, but left chaos in his home. And though Catherine's victory was undeniable, it came with a foreboding shadow. For power never disappears, it merely shifts. Those who had stood with Camilla in silence would not simply vanish. They would wait, they would watch, and they would strike again when the moment presented itself. Catherine's crown was secure, but the enemies she had earned in the process would ensure her journey forward was anything but peaceful. Yet, even as Catherine's crown was secured, the echoes of Camilla's betrayal lingered, and the scars would shape the monarchy for years to come. The battle was over, but the war had left its scars. William emerged broken but resolute, Catherine victorious yet wary, and Camilla diminished but unyielding. Behind every royal smile lay the memory of betrayal, and behind every public wave lay the truth of how close the monarchy came to collapse. The world had seen the cracks, and once seen, they could never be unseen. For William and Catherine, survival became its own form of triumph. Their bond, tested by whispers, plots, and the cruelty of betrayal, emerged stronger. Where others might have fractured under pressure, they found strength in one another. William's fury had been born from love, and Catherine's silence had been a shield of dignity. Together, they now stood as the monarchy's most unshakable figures, proof that endurance could outlast treachery. Yet, beneath their renewed unity, lingered the ache of what they had endured, a reminder that trust inside the palace walls could never again be taken for granted. Camilla, though defeated in her scheme, did not vanish into quiet submission. Her resentment hardened into something darker. She had witnessed her influence dismantled in public, her authority dismissed in favor of Catherine, the very woman she sought to erase. Though she smiled for the cameras, the bitterness within her festered. She would remain in her role, but never again with the same power. And for a woman who had fought relentlessly for her place, the humiliation was unbearable. Those close to her whispered that she would not forgive nor forget, and her presence loomed as a reminder that this conflict was not truly finished. Charles carried the heaviest burden of all. He had chosen duty over love, stability over marriage, and in doing so, secured Catherine's crown but shattered the fragile peace of his household. To the public, he appeared decisive, but behind closed doors, he was a king scarred by impossible choices. The echoes of Diana's tragedy still haunted him, and now another chapter of betrayal had been written under his reign. His legacy would forever be marked by this moment as a king torn apart by the collision of family and monarchy, love and loyalty, secrecy and truth. The image of the monarchy itself could never fully recover. The scandal had exposed its inner fractures to the world, leaving the once mystical institution vulnerable to doubt. What was once seen as untouchable now appeared fragile, human, and breakable. Yet paradoxically, the ordeal also strengthened Catherine's standing. The people's loyalty to her was no longer rooted in admiration alone. It was born from a sense of injustice, a belief that she had been wronged and yet had endured with grace. Catherine became not only their future queen but their champion, a figure of resilience who symbolized hope for a monarchy bruised but not broken. Still, a haunting truth lingered over the crown. Victory did not erase the enemies Catherine had gained, nor the bitterness that still simmered in the shadows. The monarchy had survived this storm, but its scars were visible, etched into every decision, every smile, every silence that followed. This was not the end of the struggle. It was only the beginning of darker battles yet to come. For betrayal once tasted rarely leaves the table forever. And so, the question remains, when betrayal comes from within the crown itself, can the monarchy ever truly stand unbroken again? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.